beginning of the Jewish settlement in Denver during the Pikes Peak Gold Rush in 1859. The city has always had a somewhat schizophrenic position about the Jewish community, and likewise, the Jews have had a very schizophrenic relationship with mainstream Denver as a whole. For the most part, early Denver Jews were part and parcel of the Mile High City. After years of trying, the first communal organization is Lodge 171 of the B'nai B'rith that emerges in 1872. Soon thereafter, Temple Emmanuel forms. By this time, there is a Hebrew cemetery about where the parking garage of Botanic Gardens is located. For the most part, the Jewish community is overwhelmingly members of German Reform origins. A number of leading businessmen are community leaders of the Jewish Denver at this time, and they work very much to try to be part of the greater community. And at the same time that they are doing so, a kind of Denver ruling class establishment is emerging in 1880. And this is a time when Denver's growth is taking off. In 1870, Denver had a grand total of 4,759 people. By 1880, it's 32,000 people. By 1890, it's 107,000 people. And as the city's population is booming during these years, corporate Denver is also trying to have its own identity when it forms something called the Denver Club in 1880. And this is designed to be a social, political lunch club, a place where the affluent can gather in the central business district, meet with one another, have everything from social affairs to nitty-gritty political discussions to plot the community's future. And before long, no Jews are allowed. The same is true with the Denver Athletic Club that forms in 1884. And it is more or less designed for the younger members of the business community, the athletic type, the sporting type, but also those traditional social dining, meeting facilities as well. And even while a few Jews are part and parcel of the early Denver Athletic Club, soon no Jews are allowed. And what is going on at this time is there is an international wave of anti-Semitism. In particular, Tsar Alexander III in Russia, on assuming the throne in 1881, makes anti-Semitism part and parcel of his way of trying to run the decrepit, tyrannical Tsarist empire, and he is spewing forth vile anti-Semitic propaganda across the world, and no group is more receptive to it in the United States than high society, and especially on the East Coast. Soon, no Jews are allowed in elite resorts, elite mountain communities outside of New York City. And if New York can be anti-Semitic, Denver can be anti-Semitic. And that tends to be the overall message of the Denver Club, the Denver Athletic Club, soon other institutions, including the Denver Country Club, as Denver is trying to come of age as a real metropolis. In reaction to this, in 1885, wealthy Jews, again, overwhelmingly East Denver, German origin, Reform orientation, land up forming something called the Progress Club. And the purpose of the Progress Club is basically to do for the Jewish community what the Denver Club is doing for the overall Denver Christian business community. And before long, members of the Progress Club land up constructing a fairly impressive domed hall, a couple of cupolas over at the west corner of 21st Street and Tremont Place. And besides being a center of club functions, before long, the Progress Club is also a Jewish communal meeting place where various causes, everything from campaigns to help the Jews of Russia to early Zionist efforts, are getting underway. So in a very real sense, it is something of the first Jewish community center of Denver, and its subsequent evolution bears this out. And in particular, at the same time that the Progress Club is occupying its impressive new home at 21st and Tremont, Capitol Hill is starting to emerge as the city's super deluxe, super elite neighborhood. And the Jews, seeing that all of the Goyim are moving to Capitol Hill in these very impressive manners, apartment houses, estate, the Jews likewise are soon moving to Capitol Hill. This adds up in 1913 when the Progress Club lands up occupying its new home at the southwest corner of Colfax and Williams Street. There, and the three-story structure is everything, so to speak, of this itself. In the basement, there is a swimming pool of that. There is a small gymnasium, a bowling alley, a weight room, craft rooms itself on there as a whole on that. The major bulk of the first floor is sort of a socialization center. There's a number of meeting rooms, card rooms hidden away, complete with a kitchen on that. Meanwhile, upstairs on the second floor is a grand auditorium. There is an attic, including a caretaker's facility. And before long, the Progress Club in Colfax and Williams is also very, very much a general Jewish community center. More than that, it will rent space to non-Jewish organizations. Before long, it's a favorite place for East High School proms, graduation parties, marriages of this. And at the same time that the Progress Club is flourishing, Goyish society, especially among the wealthy, decides that there's a picture of the old Progress Club at 21st and Tremont. Anyway, yeah, the Goyim are all out chasing a little white ball around as the country club movement is flourishing in the early 20th century of that. And if the Christians can play golf on elite country clubs, the Jews want the same, or such is the message of the Progress Club. And amidst all of this, in 1929, it decides it's going to have what it calls the Progress Club Country Club, or the Progress Country Club itself, when it gets a hold of the old Werner Z. Reed Jr. estate in far southwest Denver, or that's how it seemed at the time, along about West Jewel Avenue, not that far from Kipling, where eventually it lands up becoming the Green Gables Country Club. And whether it's Green Gables because Green Gables is sort of this romantic statement of this, or there was a Green family that was a major contributor, is one of those points that's been debated where there's no total consensus of that. Well, eventually members of the Green Gables Country Club are lamenting that they don't have a meeting place in central Denver, a place where they can gather close to the business community, have lunches, other facilities, especially when they don't want to go out into the country club. And on this basis, shortly after World War II, members of the Progress Club land up forming something called the Town Club when they get a hold of the old mansion at 10th Avenue and Sherman Street of Louisa Sneed Hill. And Louisa Sneed Hill was the society queen of early 20th century Denver itself. With the onset of World War II, she complains that good servant help is just not available anymore, gives up the house, moves into the Brown Palace into a residential unit where she greatly aggravates the staff until her death in the 1950s. And meanwhile, the Town Club remodels the Louisa Sneed Hill mansion. And for, again, a few years, it's a center of activity, life, and vivacity. A key problem that the Town Club lands up having is it never has a real youth program. The children of the members sometimes go and they're just utterly bored. They are alienated. So when they start coming of age, they have no enthusiasm to go and follow in their parents' footsteps as members of the Town Club. The upshot is that by the late 1980s, the Town Club is virtually decrepit. All of its membership is getting very, very old of that, and the club lands up liquidating itself and selling the mansion, and it soon becomes a leading law office of something called Morgan Foreman and Morgan out of this itself. And among their clients are the Ramsey family. Of course, you remember the Ramsey family. It was John Benet Ramsey was their daughter that dies under tragic, mysterious circumstances. I think they've just put the mansion on the set for sale, only about $7-8 million. So if anybody has a little extra change, here's your chance to buy yet another part of Denver Jewish history. Well, meanwhile, when the Progress Club becomes Green Gables, they put the structure at Colfax and Williams on the market of that, and it lands up being snapped up by the B'nai B'rith, and it becomes the B'nai B'rith Rudy Community Building of that. And there's a picture of the old Progress Club at Colfax and Williams Street. And the key figure in all of this is ISADORE Rudy. He is born of East European Jewish immigrants, probably from Austrian Poland in Belgium, about 1875 of this. There he apprentices in his father's trade as a tailor. Meanwhile, in the hope of better going and providing for his family of this, Rudy apprentices as a tailor. His father is in New York. Eventually, he joins his father. That becomes the calling card right there of ISADORE Rudy. And what happens is he gets tuberculosis. And by the turn of the century, if you get tuberculosis, you come out to Denver, the place where the air is an elixir to the breath and velvet to the cheek. And all you have to do is to breathe in the enhancing air near Rudy Park, which is what is featured in the photo right there. You breathe in the enhancing air and you land up recovering from tuberculosis. And soon, lo and behold, Rudy recovers from tuberculosis, and somehow or another, he accumulates about $110, which is what he needs for basic supplies and to rent a hole in the wall and set himself up as a merchant tailor. And soon he has an extreme initiative. He solicits door to door. Do I have a deal for you? Always some come on some way to attract business. And the story he used to tell is one day a big man comes in to be fitted for a suit. And he looks down at Rudy, who's a small, stocky character, maybe about 5 foot tall. And the customer says, hey, boy, you're going to have to get on a ladder to measure me of this. And Rudy is prepared for this. He is a short man, and he has a stool in his shop he is constantly using. And lo and behold, there he is on the stool going and measuring the customer. The customer is so tickled by this, he has the word out. Rudy creates calling cards that shows that this is indeed how he will get you a good suit for $10 at least out of that. Before long, he has a prominent location in the central business district. And all the while, as he flourishes, he remembers his poverty-stricken days. He wants to help. He wants to give to others of this. And along the way, he lands up tying up with Rabbi Charles Kavod. Back in 1903, the BMH, which is then a struggling but very rapidly growing congregation, brings in the 23-year-old Charles Kavod, a native of Lithuania, educated in the United States, as somebody to combine the best of traditional Talmudic learning with the modern practices of the United States. Soon Kavod puts his imprint on the BMH, on the Denver community as a whole of this. And he and Rudy are great friends. And this is the situation when the BMH, right at the end of World War I, is pondering a new home. And the home that the BMH decides to move to near the southeast corner of 16th Avenue and Gaylord Street is on land that was given to the synagogue by Rudy. And he always goes by the name Rudy, very rarely Isadore Rudy. Besides the synagogue proper, directly east of the synagogue, off at the southwest corner of 16th Avenue and York Street, was an old house. And Rudy gives that to the BMH as well as the Bessie Rudy Community Center. And basically, Bessie is his wife. He's very fond of his father-in-law as well, somebody named Joseph Mandel. In fact, he gives the money at this time to help endow the House of Joseph in honor of his father-in-law, what becomes Beth Joseph's Synagogue of people that don't want to be in the Capitol Hill version of the BMH. Well, soon the Bessie Rudy Community Center is primarily the Hebrew school, the social hall of the BMH itself, but something more, a real community center, complete with athletic facilities, a place where you can simply go, hang out, read magazines, play a game of pool, find somebody that'll play checkers with you, hang out in a back room with a poker game. That was something of the idea of the B'nai B'rith Rudy Community Center. And indeed, that's where it lands up becoming on this. People would go up the stairs, and if you turned left and continued down the hallway, there was a 3-room office of the B'nai B'rith. And with its own building, Lodge 171 soon claims to be the largest individual chapter of the B'nai B'rith in the world, the only chapter with a building recreation center of its own on it. If you don't want to go to the office, just before the office, there's the staircase that takes you downstairs to the gymnasium, the auditorium. Members of the B'nai B'rith are very, very much into the Boy Scout movement. And so there's a special scout room down in the basement as well. It's not that big. There's the 2nd-story auditorium of the building itself. And so that is soon a place not simply of lodge functions, but again, of banquets, celebrations, community meetings. on and on with all of this. And the B'nai B'rith Rudy Community Center is far more than a Jewish community center. In particular, it's a Capitol Hill community center. It has a large number of non-sectarian programs. The stage is used for community theater productions. At one time, a ballet company is in there. Numerous members of the community that grow up on Capitol Hill learn to swim down in the basement. And among the people that would go and recommend youngsters that they should take swimming lessons down in the basement of the B'nai B'rith building was Max Ginsberg. Max Ginsberg was the leading Jewish pediatrician of Denver from the 1920s to the 1970s. He had the Denver Children's Clinic close to the B'nai B'rith building. It was located at 16th Avenue and Vine Street. And the wife of Max Ginsberg, Helen Ginsberg, was for years a primary figure in the Jewish Community Center, long serving as the president of the board of the organization of that. And so for years, that is the B'nai B'rith building, is the Jewish Community Center, but all the while it has something of a schizophrenic personality. Is it a lodge building, or is it a community building, or maybe it's a Jewish building along the way out of this? And meanwhile, not all of the wives of the men that hang out at the B'nai B'rith Rudy building are all that happy with it, because there's a lot of poker players in the community. And on the back room of the main floor, off to the left, there's some sealed off partitions, doors, and those in the know can go in there and usually lose their week's pay at a poker game anytime they want to out of that there, which, believe it or not, is something of a legacy of the contemporary JCC and Kavod programs that maybe I shouldn't get into at all. Well, meanwhile, at the same time that the East Side Jews are going and pushing the B'nai B'rith Rudy Community Building, there's a different Jewish Denver. There's the West Side Jewish community, the West Colfax Jews, and they start coming into Denver, the earliest in the 1870s, but especially it's in the 1890s, early 20th century. There is this mass migration of Jews from the Tsarist Empire, the Habsburg Empire, Romania, other parts of Eastern Europe, and overwhelmingly they are of Orthodox, traditional backgrounds. Of that, and early on, there's extreme tensions between the East Colfax Jews and the West Colfax Jews. Meanwhile, the West Colfax Jews need meeting, gathering places of their own. And actually, among the early buildings that you could say is a Jewish community center was a place called Goldhammer Hall. And Goldhammer Hall was located at about West Colfax and Clay Street, which is today part and parcel of sort of the parking areas, mostly empty areas near Mile High Stadium itself. And it was actually an annex to a building owned by a local junk dealer, Opera Goldhammer itself. But again, it's a place to meet. It's a place to gather of this. Meanwhile, there's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of illiteracy, juvenile delinquency, social breakdown within the West Colfax Jewish community because of the aggravations of going and relocating. A lot of children, their parents are in TB sanitaria. They're running wild at this time, and to do something about all of that, something called the Colfax Settlement House lands up opening around 1900 near about West Colfax Avenue and Decatur Street, about a block to the west of Goldhammer Hall. This was sponsored by a Jewish Women's Relief Society. That it was an organization that was out there where mostly middle class, upper class Jewish women were deciding that they needed to help their poor cousins and to Americanize them. And basically, Americanizing them tended to mean that they should go and cast off their old world clothing. The men should trim their beards. They should learn to speak English rather than Yiddish and commit themselves to becoming good, successful middle class citizens. Also nearby was yet another community center, the Jerome Park Mission. And the area around West Colfax and the Platte River was sometimes called Jerome Park because there was a small park on the east side of the Platte River over at about 12th Avenue, Jerome Park proper. And the Jerome Park Mission was a Christian effort to come in and save the Jews by having them choose Jesus along the way. So again, there's some tensions on that. And actually the very presence of the Jerome Park Mission was something of a message to the Jewish women's settlement community, whatever, that we better have religious education and outreach and care as much as anything on all of this itself there. That's the later GULDMAN JCC over at West 16th Avenue and Irving Street, which is a product of yet another development over at Jerome Park. And for the most part, the area under the viaduct east of Federal Boulevard was a miserable area. Unpaved streets, very muddy, extremely sloppy on the hill leading up to Federal Boulevard, but right at the bottom of the hill, near about West 13th Avenue and Decatur Street, was a natural depression drainage area like something that was called Bloomfeld Park. Sam Bloomfeld claims he was Irish, was sheerest coincidence that his name sounded vaguely Jewish out of this, and he gets a hold of the land there around the turn of the 20th century, and he runs Bloomfeld Park as primarily a summer resort, a place you can go boating, swimming. Usually there's big picnics, fraternal organizations, a place to get out of the heated area as well. Additionally, Sam Bloomfeld is a fishmonger, and he makes sure that the lake in the park is stocked with carp and perch. And this is the situation come Friday afternoon when the Jewish woman is preparing for the Shabbos and needs to have some good gefilte fish for the occasion. And to get the carp for the gefilte fish, she goes down to see Sam Bloomfeld right at the park, and he casts his net, and he'll catch the fresh fish with her, and will sort of dicker with the terms out of that itself there. And he is not always the best person with whom to bargain of this. Sometimes he'll get so disgusted with somebody, they'll hand him the coins of this. He doesn't think that that's a fair price, and he'll just go and toss the coins into the lake. This encourages good Jewish swimmers to then dive into the lake in the hope that they're going to find the coins itself out of that. Well, anyway, by 1916, Sam Bloomfeld is sort of faded from the scene. At that time, Robert Speer has recently returned as mayor of Denver. And Speer is vowing to corporate Denver that he is doing all in his power to make Denver a city good for business. But business has to do its part as well to go and make Denver a good city for every place. And so Speer delivers an address called Give While You Live. And it's saying, don't wait for your heirs to build these big mausolea to you in cemeteries in the cities of the dead after you've passed on. Give while you live. Give now. And he lists all sorts of improvements that Denver could use. And one of them is for somebody give this money to the city of Denver so they can buy Bloomfield Park and turn it into a city park out of that itself. And the Council of Allied Jewish Women is supporting this, and soon the #1 donor for the campaign is Isadore Rudy. And when title is finally cleared to the area in 1922, the city responds by going and naming the land down at West 13th Avenue and Decatur Street up to Federal, Rudy Park. They fill in the bed of the old lake. They turn it into a real swimming pool. Eventually, there's an indoor pool. They go and they plant a softball field complete with lights over there. After World War II itself, of that, meanwhile, there were a couple of houses located at 13th and Decatur. One becomes something of a community service center facility that later is demolished for the Rudy Park Child Care Center. Over the years, the Lions Club has been a particular sponsor of that. And right next to the Child Care Center was a 5-room house that Louisa GULDMAN lands up supporting. Louisa GULDMAN is the daughter of Leopold GULDMAN, who is the merchant king of Denver in the early 20th century. He runs something called the Golden Eagle department store. There's a picture of Leopold GULDMAN that itself of this. And Louisa is very much involved in community improvements, uplift out of that. And he ran the Golden Eagle department store. 1930s picture, it was at 16th Street and Lawrence Streets of that. Well, anyway, she oversees the transformation of this old house at 13th and Decatur into the GULDMAN Community Center. Well, by the 1920s, there starts to be a rapid shift in the population of the old Jerome Park area, the section east of Federal Boulevard. The Jews are increasingly going up to the hill, settling to the west of Federal, and as they are moving out, people of Spanish American, Mexican American heritage tend to move in of this. And by the early 1930s, Louisa GULDMAN, who by this time has married a guy named Lester Friedman of this, decides that they need a new, bigger, more impressive Jewish community center for the West Colfax Jewish community. And she lands up purchasing for a new Jewish community center something called the William Mead House at the northwest corner of 16th Avenue and Irving Street of this. And soon they transform the old stables of it into a gymnasium of that, and it is rapidly taking off. And meanwhile, the GULDMAN building is a no-nonsense facility, especially as it's serving teenagers. Boys and girls are not to have any hanky-panky at the GULDMAN Community Center. In particular, it's for boys only during the days on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Sundays. Girls can only use it on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's closed on both Fridays and Saturdays. In the evening, it's co-ed of this. A lot of adult programs are there. Everything from how to gain citizenship to theater programs. It has a very, very intensive sports activity of that. And it's sort of coincidental that the guy that originally builds that house, William Mead, who was not a Jew, was very, very active in forging the May Company, being a close assistant of David May, as David May is building the May Company from a firm that starts out in Leadville to a national chain in the early 20th century. Other than that itself. Well, anyway, also another coincidence about the GULDMAN structure is living right across the alley from there at the northeast corner of 16th Avenue and Julian Street was a nondescript duplex, and that's where Golda Meir, the future Israeli prime minister, lives for a couple of crucial years of her adolescence, but that's only about 1912, 1913. So Golda couldn't have gone across the alley to see what the boys were really all like playing about at the GULDMAN Center. Meanwhile, Leopold GULDMAN himself lived in a commanding mansion at one time at the southeast corner of 10th Avenue and Humboldt Street, directly adjacent to Cheeseman Park. It's later the home of Frederick BONFILS, the scoundrelly owner of the Denver Post. Well, anyway, I'm already running out of time and haven't even gotten over to Alameda and Dahlia Street itself. Well, this is the situation after World War II. And at that time, nothing is growing more than the Jewish Community Center movement. And this is a national effort of various Jewish charities to try to have this argument that every Jewish community ought to have a central meeting place, gathering place, recreation area as a whole. Those are the proposed idea of what the early JCC was supposed to look like about 1958, when the Denver JCC is proposing a new location. It's an old sand pit. But before a Denver JCC could have a new location, you first had to create a Denver JCC. And this was the situation in 1947, when, backed by the forerunner of Jewish Colorado, Allied Jewish Confederation, that itself, a group comes together and is deciding we need to have the Jewish community centers of Denver. And in particular, it aims at taking over both the GULDMAN building and the Rudy building and forging them together into a joint Jewish community centers for the community. And the B'nai B'rith agrees with this because, again, for years, the B'nai B'rith hadn't really been able to figure out, is it a lodge or is it a community center? So by creating the Jewish Community Center, the B'nai B'rith could have the building, could have the office, but it would allow the JCC to care for the recreation programs, the hall rentals, to wink at the card games, all of that at the Colfax and Williams building. Meanwhile, for years, a lot of East Denver Jewish women had been very, very active on the board of the West Side GULDMAN building itself. And in 1947, they sort of take the initiative of pushing to create the JCC. That sort of takes about 3 years really to gestate between the first announcement that we are the JCC and the reality of the JCC operating both the East Side and the West Side facilities. Meanwhile, the 1950s sees another major shift in population patterns of Jewish Denver. And now that people have recovered from the war, have some affluence, they want something new. And no location is more favored among affluent Jews at this time than an area that is sometimes mockingly called Hanukkah Heights. Hanukkah Heights is a slang term for the hilltop neighborhood, the area off to the southeast of about 8th Avenue, Colorado Boulevard. Soon the Temple Emmanuel is building its new home over at about 1st Avenue and Grape Street in 1955, 1956. About this time, Beth Joseph has occupied its new home at 8th Avenue and Holly Street. The B'nai B'rith, or the BMH, is eventually gets a hold of land directly to the east of George Washington High School over at about South Monaco Street Parkway and Virginia Avenue. And this idea is growing that rather than having two old, dilapidated, dated, no good buildings, what Jewish Denver needs is this impressive new community center, as opposed to the tiny pool, the insubstantial gym in the basement of the Rudy building. They'll have two swimming pools, one outside, one inside. They'll have a full-length gym fit for basketball at the new facility of this. And to try to make this happen, the forerunner of Jewish Denver conducts a community survey, census, about 1955, and it decides that ground zero of the population of Jewish Denver is right at the corner of South Dahlia Street and Alameda Avenue. And what is more, the steep hill that leads down from Alameda to Leetsdale has almost been totally gorged out by this time by something called Edwards Sand Pit. And over the years, the land off of Leetsdale Avenue was something of Cowtown. There were at least a half dozen plus dairies in the location out of that, most of which are closing by the 1950s, moving elsewhere. Meanwhile, Edwards Sand Pit had gorged out a lot of the hill, selling the sand for fill for construction at this period itself, out of that itself. So the Edwards Sand Pit seems to be this ideal location. And on this basis, in 1958, the JCC announces that it is going to replace the Rudy building with this sleek, modern facility. They have groundbreaking over there itself on that. And again, a problem like this always is more expensive than expected, always takes longer than anybody would imagine of this. But anyway, the upshot of this is finally, in 1962, the new JCC lands up opening, whereupon the JCC lands up giving the old Rudy community building back to the B'nai B'rith. And the B'nai B'rith doesn't know what it wants to do with this facility itself, other than itself the logical alternative of why not form a nonprofit community organization and give this to the community as a Capitol Hill community center apparently is never pondered itself. Rather, the B'nai B'rith lands up putting the building on the market. There is absolutely no effort to save it, no effort really even to save the fixtures or the memorabilia of it, when something called Frontier Oil lands up buying the building in 1964 and comes in and levels it. One of the urban myths of East Colfax is that the filling station that replaced the JCC, which has been a Conoco for a generation or two of this, has gurgling at the very bottoms of the foundation of its gas tank, the old swimming pool of the JCC, anchoring the gas tank out of that. oh, maybe 20 years or so ago, there was a gas leak at the filling station. And I went by, but I never had the nerve to ask any members of the construction crew whether they encountered a swimming pool in trying to clean up the mess out of it. And besides, a lot of members of the Jewish community were glad to see the old Rudy building torn down. Now their husbands couldn't hide away in the poker rooms in the back room of the William Street building, and in exchange for that, the B'nai B'rith would get space in the new JCC building. Well, no sooner has the building been torn down, the JCC, the B'nai B'rith, puts the money in the bank, and most of the money from the Rudy Center, as far as I can tell, sort of just disappears over the years of it, and simultaneously, the B'nai B'rith that at one time had well over 2,000 members lands up maybe having 30 members by the beginning of the 21st century. Part and parcel of the vow of the JCC was that the old building was going to go and remain standing for the GULDMAN Center on West 16th Avenue. This is such a commitment to that lands up closing in 1964. The JCC lands up selling that building to the Boys Club of Denver. The Boys Club soon tears it down, where today among the major facilities of the Denver Boys Club is at West 16th Avenue and Irving Street, where the JCC had been located. Well, meanwhile, the new JCC is very much an ecumenical building of this. And this is very obvious for people that go swimming in the outdoor pool. When they head off to the east and look up, there's a huge cross staring up in the distance, the home of Augustana Lutheran Church. When they turn around to swim to the west towards Dahlia Street, there is a Greek cross staring up on the horizon, the home of the Augustana Greek Orthodox Cathedral there. And it's partly coincidence, but there's more than coincidence that you have three ethnic institutions on the hill near Alameda and Dahlia Street. There is a heavy Greek influx into Denver right at the beginning of the 20th century. At the same time, there is a heavy influx of Swedish Lutherans and Jews. And over the years, there's sort of this interesting interaction between them, and that they all are moving in there is sort of right when Alameda is still on the fringe of civilization. Alameda is basically a 2-lane road, later a 4-lane road, no sidewalks, simply gravel on the side of it. It's not really until the late 60s, early 70s that it lands up being landscaped into a parkway. Well, meanwhile, the JCC at its new location not only has to stabilize itself anew with numerous different programs of this itself, but again, it tries to add a new wing, the Schwader wing, over on the south side of the building that soon comes to include a very nice intimate theater that later becomes the Wolf Theater, and also part of the MIZEL Art Center with craft rooms, an art gallery, lectures, whatever on that itself. A number of Jewish day schools come to go and take possession of parts of the building. And this is another theme of Jewish Denver in the 1970s, especially with school busing. There's a large number of Jewish day schools popping up. There's been Jewish day camps associated with the JCC since about 1953, if not before then, because that used to be a big thing among Eastern Jewish charities. Is here are these poor children, they're suffering from health What we need to do at the peak of the summer is to send them to a camp, not necessarily just in the Adirondacks of New York State, but maybe since there's a lot of Jews out in Colorado, we can send them to a camp near Elberg, which becomes the JCC camp over the years out of it. And so again, you have this idea there, and all the while, the JCC starts going and having a split personality as well. Is it an athletic club or is it a community center? And for the most part, it's done a fairly good job of being both, with the two different wings of the building often being separated, that people that use it for one thing don't necessarily use it for the other thing. Meanwhile, what the Kavod lecture series is about was at one time also partly sponsored by the JCC, and usually after the lecture in the morning, they would have a hot lunch for participants of it, and then at the end of the lunch, there would be a corner in a certain room, maybe the Perlmutter room off near the south entrance, where the true devotees of the traditions of the old B'nai B'rith Rudy building would all gather for their hot and heavy poker game for the situation itself. The JCC has also had this constant challenge of renovation, of fundraising. There's almost seemingly been a cycle over the years where it has great ambitions, it fulfills them, suddenly it finds itself broke, it suddenly needs to bring in new money, new organizers, new fundraisers out of it. After years of simply being the Jewish community center, back in the course of the 1980s, 1990s, Robert Luke is very, very active in the JCC, who gives a lot of money, a lot of support to the organization that becomes the Loop Jewish Community Center. Right about the time he dies in the 1990s, there's a new financial problems associated with it. And within a few years, Bob Steinberg goes and takes possession. And he has been a foremost figure in the national JCC movement. He starts out in St. Louis, donates money to the JCC there, into Kansas City, in Omaha, big developer. And meanwhile, part and parcel of the JCC complex has been the home of Jewish Colorado. And for years, the Allied Jewish Federation had its offices downtown. Finally, as the JCC is taking hold, expanding, growing in the 1970s, they basically seal off the Alameda Street entry to the JCC, which you used to have to walk down a steep step of flights of steps to it itself there, and they build a new home for the Allied Jewish Federation that lands up going and being organized as Jewish Colorado. In recent years, as part of the endless cycle of what the JCC is financing, the Rose Community Foundation has been a key funder of the JCC, actually something of the owner of it, with a long 100-year lease or so to the JCC. And meanwhile, things constantly change, like something that greatly surprised me the last time I was right over by the JCC about a month ago, is for years there was this big menorah totally dominated the southeast corner of Alameda and South Dahlia Street. And come Hanukkah, Chabad would take charge of having a menorah lighting there.